In the world of modern politics, it's a high-stakes game. Campaigns are always, and I mean always, looking for an edge. But what happens when getting that edge means using a strategy that could just completely blow up in your face? Let's dive into the risky playbook that's really changing how elections are won and lost.
Okay, so to get why campaigns are getting so, well, creative, we have to start with the current political climate. And this number says a lot. D+6. It's from a recent CY Journal poll, and it shows a huge one-month swing toward Democrats on the generic congressional ballot. That's the poll that just asked if you plan to vote Democrat or Republican. A jump that big, that fast, it tells you the ground underneath everyone's feet is shaky. And when things are unstable, campaigns start looking for any advantage they can possibly find. So, what's causing all this shakiness? Well, if you look at the polls, voters have one thing on their mind more than anything else: the economy. I mean, yeah, threats to democracy is right up there, but anxiety over inflation and the cost of living has just shot to the #1 spot. And that creates this really powerful current of unease among voters. And all that anxiety about money, it's feeding into this much broader, kind of pessimistic feeling. For the first time in a bit, a pretty big majority of voters feel like the country's just heading in the wrong direction. Now, that is a tough, tough environment for any campaign to try and navigate. So that brings us right to the main question, doesn't it? When the election margins are razor thin and the national mood is this sour, what kind of unconventional, maybe even risky things might a campaign be willing to try just to get a win? Well, the answer for some is a strategy that's, let's just say it's both really clever and really, really controversial. We're going to break down the rise of what researchers are calling metal advertising. First, a little context on why this is even a thing. Since 1998, ad spending in races that aren't for president has just exploded. We're talking a 450% increase. The airwaves are totally saturated with political ads. So to stand out, campaigns feel like they have to get creative, and that competition has led to some pretty aggressive strategies. So what is metal advertising exactly? Well, imagine this. A party, let's say it's the Democrats, intentionally runs ads to help a far-right Republican candidate win their primary. Why on earth would they do that? The thinking is that this more extreme candidate will be way easier for their own nominee to beat in the final showdown, the general election. This slide here really nails the analogy. It is a huge strategic gamble. You're not just trying to win your own race, you're actively trying to manipulate the other team's lineup so you get an easier opponent in the finals. And the playbook itself seems pretty simple on the surface. Step 1. You find a candidate on the other side who you think is maybe too extreme or too flawed to win over mainstream voters. Step 2. You spend your own money on ads that make that candidate look like a true hero to their party's base. And then step 3, you cross your fingers and hope that you get to face that, quote, weaker opponent in November. And you gotta understand, this isn't some small-time tactic. In just the last midterm election cycle, Democratic groups spent over $53 million on these kinds of ads in different states. This is a big, well-funded strategy. But as it turns out, it comes with some serious hidden costs. So, what happens when voters find out about this political jujitsu? Well, as we're about to see, this clever strategy can backfire in a big way and end up hurting the very candidates who use it. According to research out of Columbia Business School, the problem is actually pretty simple. When voters find out a candidate from their own party is meddling like this, they just see it as sneaky and underhanded. It makes them start to question that candidate's moral character. And this isn't just some vague, bad feeling people get. No, the effects are real. They're measurable. The research found these voters are less likely to actually vote for the candidate who used the tactic, they're less likely to open up their wallets and donate, and they're more likely to talk trash about them to their friends and family. What's even more worrying, for some people, it just makes them want to check out of politics completely. And that right there brings us to the biggest risk of all. The damage isn't just limited to one candidate or one election. It starts to chip away at the very foundation of the whole system. It's kind of like a domino effect. If voters start to think that primaries aren't really about what a party's base wants, but are instead being manipulated by the other side, that seed of doubt can easily grow and start to affect how they see the general election too.
Professor Hussein really hits the nail on the head here. This kind of meddling plants a serious question in people's minds. Is this a fair fight, or is the whole thing just being rigged behind the scenes? It makes them wonder if they can really trust the system at all.
And that question, that little crack in the trust, that's the systemic risk we're talking about. When people feel like the game itself might be rigged, their willingness to play along and to accept the results starts to fall apart. So that brings up a pretty obvious question. Why would any campaign be willing to take such a huge risk? To get that, we have to bring it all back to the political reality we're in right now. The simple answer really comes down to one word: pressure. When political control of the country is balanced on a knife's edge, the temptation to find any advantage, no matter how risky it is, becomes incredibly powerful.
I mean, just look at the hard numbers. The U.S. Senate is so closely divided. Control is just incredibly tight. A swing of only a few seats can completely change the direction of the entire country.
And this is the aha moment. This is why it all matters so much. When the stakes are this incredibly high, one single Senate race can decide who holds the power. And in that environment, a crazy gamble like middle-in advertising might start to look, at least to some strategists, like a risk worth taking.
Which really leaves us all with a pretty difficult question to chew on. In this era of intense polarization with these razor-thin majorities, is this kind of high-risk, trust-destroying gamesmanship just the new normal? Is it just an unavoidable side effect of a political system that's been pushed to its absolute limits? That's something we should probably all be thinking about.